Chapter 13, Key Issue 4, Content Objective. Explain the problems to future cities and future urban developments and sustainability solutions in the future. Your ICANN statements. Define filtering, redlining, public housing, gentrification, racial steering, and underclass. 2. Describe the process of deterioration and gentrification in cities. 3. Explain the problems of a permanent underclass and culture of poverty in cities. 4. Explain the urban perspectives of women within defined urban areas. 5. Describe the difficulties that cities face in paying for services, especially in a recession or an economic downturn. Before we begin, something to keep in mind. Some cities are thriving while others struggle. Some neighborhoods are animated while others are desolate. This chapter and these notes will look at some of these issues, and we'll look at the contrasts of opportunities and challenges to some of our cities in the United States. Talking about the process of deterioration, we did talk about blockbusting in our ethnicity unit. To go along with that, when we look at the underclass, which we'll talk about here in a minute, we have filtering, which is subdividing larger, older homes that were built in the 1900s into subunits or smaller dwellings. And the landlords typically do not maintain the buildings, and oftentimes they're referred to as slumlords. And the reason for this is to maximize the profit and take advantage of the underclass that resides in the central city. Redlining is, we talked about again in Chapter 7, Ethnicity. This is when real estate agents draw literally a red line on a map and refuse loans to certain groups. Those loans can be to purchase a house or fix a house. Redlining is illegal, but it's very difficult to prove and enforce. And racial steering is when you have real estate agents that will only show certain races or ethnic groups certain properties. These are all problems of cities, of the central city, and specifically with the permanent underclass. Here is redlining if you want to take a look. Here's a map of redlining in Virginia. We can see federal home loans, bank reports in 1933. They mapped out an area where, where the area the color red would be an area where they deemed hazardous, and banks denied mortgage loans to the residents in those red areas. That would be an example of redlining in Virginia. Public housing. Public housing is by definition a government-owned housing rented to low-income people with rent set at 30% of the tenant's income. And in other countries, local governments or non-government agencies or organizations such as charitable groups build their own housing, and they're aided by subsidies from the national government. So the United States deals with public housing very differently than other parts of the world. Public housing through the years, there was the failed attempt at public housing for public high-rise housing projects in the U.S. and Europe, and these just exacerbated the problems of the permanent underclass, where you would have low-income families that were concentrated in high-density environments, and within those high-density environments, there were people without money. They don't have resources. They couldn't pay electric bills. They couldn't pay basic human geographical needs, a healthy meal, and it led to drug use and crime. And also in these areas, the upkeep or maintenance was minimized, so there were many things that were broken with lights, elevators. And again, it was just a point in history where we realize in retrospect that it was not a successful attempt at helping house those that are less fortunate. In Britain, there was a supply of public housing as known as social housing. Government forced local authority, but government dissolved these large high-rises, and they forced the government authorities to sell some of the dwellings of the residents, which led to British also expanding subsidies to nonprofit housing associations. Here's a look at the high-rises that were constructed in the 50s, and again, they were demolished in the 70s, and so we see now displacement of public housing. That then in the 80s, we'll start to see Section 8 housing and intermixed housing moving to suburb regions. All right, and here's an explanation of how public housing works today. The permanent underclass, those are seen as the socioeconomic disadvantaged group of citizens. So they're defined as a group of people that are trapped in an unending cycle of economic and social problems. So they don't participate in material benefits in society. These problems can be these social problems and economic problems can start with schooling, where many don't graduate from school, where nearly in the latest estimates in your textbook state that I can't find the exact stat, but there's a number that don't go to public school or graduate from high school. Only half graduate from high school, I'm sorry. And then with that, then they are going to be low skilled. So then they're going to be taking on jobs that are low skilled, that they won't have technical skills. And keep in mind what we talked about in the previous key issues, that most of the consumer service low skilled jobs are moving to the suburbs, and many of these underclass people won't have a means of transportation. Public transportation would be a long period of time to commute to and from a suburban consumer service job. So many of this underclass, they're trapped in these economic problems, and with these economic problems come bad choices with alcoholism and drug addiction, illiteracy, juvenile delinquency, and crime. Again, these are all problems that would that come because of their lack of economic opportunity. And then we see deteriorated schools, poorer schools, less economic. We see a technological divide where suburban through tax dollars have more technological advancements than central city schools. And then good learning habits are ignored. Attendance is an issue. Completing of work. These are all cyclical issues that lead to this permanent underclass that's disproportionately African American in ethnicity. And then we start to see zones of abandonment where public services once existed because of the low property taxes. They're unable to pay for those services because they have a very minimal tax base. And one of the glaring issues we do see are food deserts. Without proper supermarkets and proper nutrition grocery stores, there's the limit on how many stores can meet the need of the central city underclass. So again, it leads to food deserts in the inner city or central city. And again, we can see in Cincinnati, here is a case where they're lining up for food distribution, which is free food, and I'm not sure what this place. Oh, it's over the Rhine neighborhood. It's in an area that's being gentrified, and so it's a neighborhood bakery that's offering free food to the underclass. Here's a look at the ethnic distribution, and we can see that in the central city, African Americans are disproportionately higher in the central city of Chicago. Then we can also see Hispanics found on the south side and what would be the southwest side. When we look at the culture of poverty and the challenges of families, unwed mothers make up 2/3 of babies that are born in the U.S. 80% of the children in inner city live with only one parent. There's inadequate child services. There's a propensity for higher drug abuse. And then also, they're trapped in the welfare system. So if a father or a significant other moved back home, then the mother would lose all welfare benefits, leaving the couple financially worse than often if they were apart. And here's an article that talks about why American black mothers and babies are in life or death crisis. All right, looking at women and their social perspective within urban areas they're defined three characteristics. Cities are not viewed or experienced the same by men and women. So through that perspective, women they're more women. There is a higher propensity of sexual harassment and assault. We can see that in major cities like Washington, D.C. and New York City, the women outnumber the men. And many households are led by women, so women have this dichotomy of a life where they take care of their children and they also work a full-time job. Two, female-headed households with children are the bulk of the poor, as we just learned in the central city. 2/3 of all babies born in the U.S. are in central cities. Child care costs are high, and low wages cause them to go in poverty. So sometimes the child care wages are as much as their paying wage. So they offset, so there's zero revenue generated for the family. And then women traditionally are found in women job roles that are inaccessible to male jobs like clerical work or administrative work. And then women tend to rely on mass transit and have shorter trips. And their movement on mass transit is very intentional because of the dangers that lurk or perceived dangers that lurk. Suburban women are very different than central city women. They're confined to places without meaningful choices in a lot of suburbs because, as we saw with consumer services increasing in the suburban area, that might be minimized. However, consumer services are so spread out, oftentimes it takes a car to go to those consumer services. Oftentimes mothers don't work. Males pay for the living wages, and females stay at home and are prevalent within important decisions that are made at home. When we move from an industrial economy to a service economy, we see again changes in the central city. We talked about brownfields, which are former industrial manufactured plant areas with their concrete parking lots, are renovated or gentrified. We see food deserts as a problem within central cities. We see no longer the rail yards needed in the central city because now there's trucks that take from rail carts that usually drop off at the outer belt line of the urban loop in one-story industrial manufacturing plants in suburbs. Smokestacks have decreased, so pollution in central cities has decreased except for the pollution that comes from carbon dioxide emissions of cars and photochemical smog. Industrial waterfronts have changed through gentrification to commercial use, commercial retail, commercial hospitality. And then we see, again, more consumptive consumer services shape the cultural landscape. And this really has ushered in the idea of revitalizing inner city and gentrification. So we talk about the movement to the central city, which happens to be older people without children, so they're not worried about schools. They're worried about shorter transportation and entertainment, such as museums or theaters or restaurants, and they also don't have to deal with problems of owning a personal vehicle. So we begin to see this movement back to the city. All right, we can take a look at Cabrini Green, which was a former high-rise public housing complex in Chicago, and it's been demolished, and now it's being replaced by middle-class new houses, as we can see down here. Gentrification, there's pros and cons to gentrification. Gentrification is the process of renovating a dilapidated inner city or a deteriorated inner city to make way for middle class. But oftentimes what happens when areas are gentrified, the poor class is displaced. In some cities with gentrification, they provide lower class loans and tax breaks. Lower incomes and most of the times they're forced out of the areas because the rent is too high and the consumer services are too high and they don't have expendable income or purchasing power parity with these increased consumer services. Why middle class are attracted? Because the architecture character, there's customized architecture that has unique forms from the 1900s. And then there's also proximity, as I mentioned, to recreational activities, and then no need for a car or a personal vehicle. All right, here's one perspective, a TED Talk on gentrification. Here's a look at what gentrification looks like before, and then now you see the renovation. And really the renovation is the facade, the storefront. Everything's aesthetically appealing to the eye. All right, and this is Soho neighborhood. Estimates are, according to 2020, there's at least one area or neighborhood in every city that's being gentrified. Here's another look at an upscale suburb in Chicago and the gentrification and what we're seeing in these outlining first-ring suburb areas. Are we beginning to see deterioration of the one-story single-family homes, and now they're putting up McMansions. And we started to see that in the late 90s. All right, again, city renewal. This is in Cleveland or Cincinnati. Again, when we look at the inner city services, we look at these, most, like I already mentioned, at least one city is being gentrified. When we look at gentrification, again, it's attractive shops, but it's also high-cost living. And it also changed the ethnic demographics, which we can see in these two pictures. Here's a look at the Reading Terminal in Philadelphia. Again, the Reading Terminal, which barely survived during the 20th century suburbanization movement, but has been revitalized in the central city, and it's a thriving marketplace with individual stalls operated by different merchants, as you can see. We have a similar place that we might take a field trip to, depending on COVID situations, but that would be the Midtown Market in South Minneapolis. All right, city renewal. Some of the ways that the city is going to change. In the future, we will see three basic changes, and then we can anticipate more vehicles will be powered by electricity instead of petroleum. As mentioned yesterday, Los Angeles just announced in the paper 2020 that by 2035 they will eliminate all gas vehicles from their streets. 2, ownership. We're starting to see shared ride, maybe less ownership of single vehicles. We'll see autonomy, again, to what level? We talked about 5 levels of autonomy, but right now most drivers with the newer cars will have at least a level 1 autonomy where there's braking features or changing lane features for safety. Take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. Let's talk about the economic challenges found in central cities. Looking at the economic challenges, we alluded to them already with the underclass and the elimination of a tax base. With the elimination of a tax base, now you're not able to afford public services. So really the city has 2 choices. One choice is to reduce the services, so reduce the police force, reduce the fire force, reduce sanitation, or to raise tax revenues. And that tax revenue, again, puts the underclass in a greater economic hardship, where we see the gap between suburban living and central city living is growing wider. And again, this connects back to what we talked about with austerity approach. That's reducing services, and then stimulus is increasing tax revenue. All right, impact of recessions in 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis, our housing crisis put us in a severe recession, lowered the values of houses, it lowered the property taxes, it lowered the revenues coming into cities. Many borrowers ceased paying their mortgages, and there were many foreclosures that happened. Again, this hits hardest with um, the low socioeconomic classes. Here's a look at foreclosures, and with that increases the underclass, the permanent underclass, and with that comes crime. All right, and that will take us to the end. All right, and that wraps up all the content for Human Geography this year. Excellent work, everyone. I appreciate all your hard work you put in. It will pay dividends as you navigate through the high school process.